Welcome to the Small Business Big Insights podcast. Very excited today to share this episode with some really big insights from our very special guest, Neri Karra Sillaman, who shares with us some great insights from her newly released book, covering some topics starting business during uncertain times, and especially for immigrant entrepreneurs in Canada. And so I invite you right now to subscribe to the podcast, or you're going to miss out on some upcoming episodes. So I also invite you to leave a review on your podcast platform of choice and help us spread the message. So today we're joined by Neri, and so Neri is a PhD, globally recognized entrepreneur, best-selling author of Pioneers, and a Thinkers 50 Radar honoree. She's also a former refugee who's built a successful luxury brand from the ground up, and now she teaches entrepreneurship at Oxford and advises leaders on how to build resilient, purpose-driven businesses that actually last. And so on our podcast, Neri brings powerful insights from 25 years worth of real world experience and cutting edge research, offering small business owners a practical blueprint for long-term success, innovation, and legacy. So we're very lucky to have Neri Karra Sillaman with us here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here.
Maybe I can ask you, I guess, just big picture here. What kind of inspired you to even write Pioneers and to focus on kind of the immigrant entrepreneurs specifically?
Sure. As you mentioned, Eric, I am a refugee. At the age of 11, with my family, with only 2 suitcases to our names, we became refugees from Bulgaria to Turkey in June of 1989. So this book is very personal to me. It's very much my own lived experience, because later on, after I would graduate from University of Miami, we would start our own luxury leather goods business. So I am a refugee, an immigrant entrepreneur, and I have been, during my PhD, I was, of course, using my own company as a case study. I studied international entrepreneurship, and I used my own company as a case study because we were a born global company as well. But then, as I'm going into the research, I realized the aspect of ethnic and immigrant entrepreneurship, because this is a very significant factor. So immediately I start researching that as well. So we are talking over 20 years ago when I first started to research this topic. But life happens. I mean, there are different things over the years. It was not my focused research going further. And we continued building our business. And fast forward to 25 years later, I am sitting on the couch here with my husband here in France. And I'm talking about what should be the next direction of my work. And he said to me, "Why don't you write about what you know? You are an immigrant entrepreneur." And the next day, I kind of said, I don't know. I don't know if it's an interesting enough. Like, I was not dismissive, but maybe a little bit dismissive. But the next day, of course, I'm a researcher. I'm very curious in general. So I come across this statistic, which is nearly 50% of Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants. And 80% of billion-dollar startups have a founder or an executive who is from an immigrant background. That's 80% of billion-dollar startups. And then statistically, immigrant-founded businesses last longer than their counterparts. So because we, as an immigrant, as a refugee, I was always very much intrigued by what creates an iconic brand. Our business was in fashion, is in fashion. So why is it that for years I've pondered with this question? Why is it that we know the name of Coco Chanel, but we don't know the name of Paul Poiret? Why is it that we know the name of Louis Vuitton, but other designers have been forgotten? What creates an iconic brand? What creates business longevity? What creates brand longevity as well? So for me, this was really very interesting. And no one has, in research, everyone talks about how immigrants are more likely to start businesses because they come to a country, they don't know much about. They don't really have much social capital. Their education is not always recognized in the countries they immigrate to, so they are almost forced to become entrepreneurs because they have no other way but to do that. So it's called necessity entrepreneurship. And like when you look at the literature, everyone already agrees immigrants are more likely to become entrepreneurs. But no one has said, hang on a second, why is it that they are more likely to start businesses that last? That's so for me, this was the starting angle, the starting point of that. And there is a very famous book called Built to Last, but it has not been challenged. So one of the reviews on Amazon, I love that review. I still don't know who wrote it. One of the readers wrote, finally, a book that challenges Built to Last. I wouldn't say I challenge it, but I would say I add on it. And it's an updated, if I dare say so myself, it's an updated version of it. And it comes from the fact that immigrants, when they start their businesses, when they grow their businesses, they do it differently. So that's the inspiration behind Pioneers, 8 principles of business longevity from immigrant entrepreneurs.
Wow. Okay. Well, there's a lot to digest there, and I guess from your experience, what exactly do immigrants do differently when they are building a business that helps them become those great companies or the ones that actually do last?
So because they come from a different culture, different country, they tend to see opportunities that other people who live in that particular country or culture will not necessarily be able to spot. Of course, everyone knows about the immigrant resilience. That's not even a question. And they will not look at failure the same way. They don't even classify or think of failure the way that other people would think of failure. They see, when I was interviewing the entrepreneurs, one of them said, no is the beginning of negotiation. When I hear no, I know I'm onto something. I know I have to keep going. I know there is something there. So other people will not necessarily, say, okay, I heard no, I guess this is a rejection. But to them, failure and rejection doesn't register the same way. Another aspect is they are very much reliant on their community. So in the business literature, community is being talked as something nice to have. That, if you read HBR articles or books about community, you will. But what immigrant entrepreneurs do is that they use community as their strategic advantage. It's their competitive advantage. Often when they immigrate, they will lose the connections. They will lose many of their social ties. And when they start to rebuild these connections, they are very much, there is value. They see great value in that. And they value those connections. The way they build their businesses, there is an aspect of community from Chobani to Moderna. These are all entrepreneurs I interviewed in the book. Dermalogica, Duolingo, these are all companies started by immigrants. So it's, we will look at Google, we will not necessarily think the founder or Duolingo's, we use Duolingo, but I wonder how many people realize there is an immigrant behind these amazing companies. So another thing, they are able to reframe their past. And I talked about that in terms of reframing failure, reframing rejection, but they are also able to reframe their past. They don't look at what happened to them as something unfortunate or as something challenging, but there is always this sense of optimism and going forward. And looking at a problem that also ties into looking at a problem and seeing a different solution to it. Another aspect is that we talk about luck. I talk about in my book, the eighth principle is luck. But that's an interesting one because when I was doing my interviews, every single one of them mentioned the word luck to me. They would say, I was lucky I got to New York. I was lucky I met so and so. I was lucky, the customers liked my product. So I noticed like the word luck, but when you really go deeper into it, they don't mean luck the way that, it's not something that happened to them. It's not a lucky event that happened to them, but it's more of a skill. It's a skill. Luck is a skill that they actively are very much aware of when it happens. And not only that, when a so-called lucky event happens, they know how to immediately make use of that. But another thing, Eric, this is something I've been thinking, and I wish I went much deeper in the book. But of course, my publisher, I had to cut so much because I
Sure,
wrote.
yeah.
But it's about choice because it's not what happened to you. It's not so much that, but they have agency. There is a choice. What can I do now? There is a choice,
Hmm.
and that's a very powerful. And in business, how does this apply to business? We live in such volatile times at the moment. You can be on the verge of bankruptcy. Your clients may have deserted you. Your product may not be selling well. But you also have to ask yourself, what is the choice now in front of me? And I think
Hmm.
that's something that I have observed. There is not this pessimism. In fact, among all the people I interviewed, there was this sense of optimism that,
Mm.
and they never saw themselves as, as victims of fate. The opposite. They saw
Mm.
themselves lucky.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of like kind of the Stoic kind of philosophy, right? Like in Stoicism, like it's about like, well, what are you going to do about it? Like what's in your own control, not oh my God, like
I
that
see.
happened. It's very much about like what am I going to do about it? Because that's the only thing in my control. And I guess for you specifically, you have a bit of an academic background, right? But you also have kind of the real world business experience, and so um, from those kind of two worlds, what do you see as the biggest disconnect between kind of the theory
Mhm.
and the actual practice of business?
That's a very good question. I had a very big, after I finished my PhD at Cambridge, and of course, everyone, what is the next step? The next step was to do my, research fellowship at LSE. But then I'm very sorry to say, and if any academic, if anyone is listening now, but I felt disillusionment because,
Mm.
and I don't dismiss it. It's a very, very difficult profession. A lot goes into the research. You have to be very smart and make connections between different variables. That's I would say, but do it in an original way. I think the biggest disconnect has to do with the audience because as an academic, you have to publish papers and you have to publish them in highly ranked academic journals, and there are editors there are reviewers who review your paper, and then they give you feedback, and like people that you interview, they will be real life companies, or
Right.
your research will come from real life, but by the time something is published, it's been a year or even 2 years. So
Mm.
that's like that can take a long time.
Right.
So the audience also is not always business owners. The audience is your fellow academics. I think that's the disconnect. But the good thing is it's of course changing. Our industry is also changing. I know there are categories, especially in financial times, where they will highlight and reward research that is very much based on practical world experience. So that's I would say the biggest reason. The
Hmm.
audience in academia, you are talking to your fellow academics.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because you're getting real world experience. It's not polished answers sometimes from like the business owners, and then you have to kind of like frame it in a way that it's good for an academic, but
Yes,
it's not necessarily the end user who's going to benefit from that research too. Like it's kind of like, yeah,
exactly,
there's multiple,
exactly.
yeah, users. That's interesting.
But you do have HBR. I really like HBR because in HBR you get to have
Oh
the
yeah,
practical, and HBR really asks you what are the practical takeaways, and they have to be as original as they can be. So there are of course outlets that cater to real world businesses.
yeah. Their users are the day-to-day
Yes,
business people. Their users are not the fellow PhD
exactly,
academics. Like yeah, that's interesting.
exactly.
Okay, and I know you've talked a lot about like purpose in businesses, and as part of your book, as part of like you just kind of like your career, and so what, like a lot of small business owners kind of like romanticize purpose, or they kind of like it's kind of like a thing. But how do you know if purpose is driving profit or if it's kind of draining the profits of the business?
Purpose doesn't have to be excluded from profitability. You have to have a profitable business in order. I mean, your purpose can be I want to be, sometimes as simple as usually in immigrant entrepreneurs, I want to provide for my family. This was our purpose. It wasn't to build a sustainable business with zero waste production. It really wasn't. It really, in the very beginning, day to day,
Yeah,
we
you
are
got to be
talking.
honest with yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think most entrepreneurs actually start with a very practical purpose, but then you can romanticize it. But I think the two don't have to be separate from each other.
I think that's interesting, the way you're framing it, that like in a way, like the first time entrepreneur, or like, when you're just trying to do your first business, like there's no way that your main purpose is to like change the world. Like you need to live, you need to like sustain yourself and feed your family and all of that. And so you kind of like, it's true that like maybe the second time entrepreneur or second time founder or third time founder, like by then they've like gained financial stability, and now they can kind of concentrate on the things they truly care about, or like they don't have to be profit driven, they can be kind of a little bit more of like purpose driven, because they've kind of like taken care as part of like the Maslow hierarchy their own like kind of needs, and now it's like, okay, now we can take care of other people's needs. That.
Yeah, but the two are related. And I'll tell you as an example from our own business. So when we started the business, it was we want to provide for our family. We are an immigrant family. We want to be able to send our kids to school. Was my father's purpose. But we also want to make the highest quality product, and the highest quality Italian leather, Italian glue, highest quality of Turkish manufacturing, everything made by hand. So because that's the way to do business. In this was one of our values was very much this. We didn't know any better, and we wouldn't be able to. I mean, I guess it will sound too big to say this. We wouldn't be able to live with ourselves and put our name on this brand Neri Karra and say, yeah, I made an okay product. You want to make the very best product possible. But also our purpose for that is to be able to live well as an immigrant family. So the two are connected. There doesn't have to be a disconnect between purpose and what you do and profitability. And that's my answer, and that's what I've seen.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like there's a sense of like pride that it's like you want your name affiliated with something of quality, or you want your name affiliated with like a certain purpose, and that can all kind of work together in giving yourself a life that you can sustain yourself, but also something of quality, something you're going to be proud of, and there might also be a good business model around that. Yeah. Interesting. And I guess like you specifically as a refugee, right? Like how did that help shape the way that you approach either academia or business or leadership? Like how do you think that helped you stand apart?
Well, we were very much focused on community. And that's because we didn't have anything else. We didn't have much capital, financial capital, but we knew, and you make the very best, I call it frying in your own oil. You have to, and it's a concept from my grandfather, which means to be self-sufficient. And self-sufficient doesn't mean you are shut out from the world and you only live by yourself, but it actually ties into business theory, which it means you have to look at what you have. What are your resources? What are your assets? Who do you know? And how can I utilize them in the best way possible that will allow me to create my vision? So the way that we approached our business, we very much mobilized everyone in my family. We worked together, but we also looked at the people we know. So it's a very long story to go into how the whole business started, but I go into detail about it in my book, and
Okay.
and if anyone is interested, they could read about it there. But it's very much about who do you know, how can you help each other. It's not, also that's a very important point here, it's not about how can you help me, but how can we help each other. And there was very much that in the beginning, working together in order to create the vision that we had. And how that informs me today, I think being a refugee, it made me very determined because I knew that I don't have any other choice. Nothing is handed to me. I don't come from privilege. I know that if I want to do something, if I want to create something, I have to work for it. So I think today, and I've written a lot about resilience, but yeah, and I think there is the misconception as well between resilience being you have to be strong, you have to be, stoic. Resilience, in my opinion, is opposite of that. But yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, you're saying kind of how like it's important to kind of help each other out, and it reminded me how, you know, I mean, many years ago, people when they would hear that like maybe a friend of yours owns a business or whatever, it's like, oh, can they get me a discount, you know? And then, but like at the end of the day, if it's your friend, you should be willing to pay full price to support them. You know, like you're not looking for the deal, but you're trying to like pay full price, and they'll pay full price for your services, and then you're helping each other out, you know. And I thought that was like an interesting, yeah, frame of mind. I guess in your case, like you built, you know, this great luxury brand. When you kind of started, what were some of your beliefs that changed over time? So, you know, you thought one thing, but then it turns out things were very different in the real world.
Well, for example, when we created our very first collection, we were very sure that we will have a distributor, and it's someone that we worked with for many, many years. So we went to him with our very first collection, and this is, make or break. And he looked at it and said, I'm not going to take a risk on an unknown brand. So that's like your business idea, your everything, just like immediately, you haven't even started, it's finished. So how do you go further? How do you continue? And you have to pivot. So we went to other distributors that we knew. And I think in year one, and this, I was 22, I think you talked about the difference between academia and real life. That was the biggest realization for me. What you write on paper or what you plan is not always what happens in real life. So you end up with, again, I have to go that, you end up with a different route that you didn't plan on taking, but it was meant to be. So that was in year one, my biggest realization is that, fresh out of university, and what I wrote in the business plan, how I thought things would go, didn't go. And I think realizing how much that it takes tremendous amount of work. Things don't always work out as you planned, but also it takes tremendous amount of work to make something happen.
Yeah, you have to keep putting that time and effort, and then like to get that big break where they will be the distributor, and then they bail or they don't do it. And it's like, okay, well, if they're not going to give me a chance, why would someone else give me the chance? And it must be very discouraging in that moment, because you're just like, you thought you're almost like betrayed. You thought this was your
Yeah,
way to kind of get it, and you're like, wait, what? Like, I've been
exactly.
planning on this.
Yeah.
Like, you're my best opportunity. Like, you're my closest relationship with like a distributor. Like, now I have to start from scratch. Like, it's yeah, that must have been very hard.
Yes.
And I guess for you, like, you've written and you've spoken about business ethics, and so what would you do, I guess, when you're faced with a situation of doing the right thing, but it hurts your bottom line?
It hasn't happened to me,
Oh, no
because
way. Okay.
if something like I in terms of business ethics, in the sense that if something is good for the business, if in terms of working well with managing our employees well, buying the highest quality of raw material, making sure everyone is very well taken care of in the company, having a positive work environment, that is only good for the bottom line. So that's for me business ethics. But if you have a different example that you were thinking about, I'm happy to hear it. But for me, anything that is good for humanity, good for the employees, good for the business, is also good for the bottom line. That's what I've experienced. And if you cut corners, if you are thinking, oh, I don't need to maybe use water-based glue, or I don't need to, it's then it hurts your business in the long term.
It's almost like uncompromising kind of quality, especially when you're dealing with like quality material or quality product and luxury brand. You can't be compromising. It has to be kind of the best.
Yeah,
And yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I guess as part of this kind of like segment, we can kind of go through a little bit more of a fun
sure.
rapid fire kind of
I
questions.
love those.
Okay. So you kind of give me the first answer that comes to mind here. So what's kind of a daily habit that's made you a big difference in your life?
My morning pages. I wake up.
Your morning pages,
Yes,
like the
it's
newspaper?
no.
Like, okay.
I wake up. It's from Julia Cameron, Artist's Way.
Okay.
It's a book that is exceptional. I wake up
Okay.
before I look at my phone, before I do anything. I start writing whatever is in my mind.
Oh, wow.
And
Interesting. So like journaling,
yes,
like, yeah.
journaling. And I'll do that. Sometimes it's I don't even know how long it is. I can be 20 minutes. And after I've almost like cleared my mind, it's like brushing my mind instead of brushing my teeth. And
Yeah.
then I will meditate for about 10 minutes. It
Wow.
made a big
Okay.
difference.
Yeah. Geez. Yeah, I guess we can all probably meditate a little bit more and write down some journals and some thoughts, and that makes a lot of sense. Who's your favorite author?
Charles C. Brooks.
Charles C. Brooks?
I
Okay.
think, yes, From Strength to Strength is the first book
Okay.
I read by him, and it was an inspiration for me when I was writing Pioneers. His writing style
Yeah.
really speaks to
Yeah.
me.
Okay. Cool. And next question is, what's the most overrated business book? So one that people kind of think highly of, but really is not that good.
Oh no, should I? Can Oops. I might get I mean, I read 4 hour. I don't know. It may have been updated now, but years ago when I
Oh
read
yeah.
4 Hour Work Week, I just it didn't. It didn't apply to me. I mean, I found it a bit gimmicky. I didn't find it to be realistic, and it maybe didn't align with how I think about work and life.
Yeah, it wasn't your style. Like it
Yes,
wasn't
it
about like
wasn't my
working the
style.
least amount possible. You tend to go with like how to have the highest quality product and luxury brand, and that's a very different mentality. Yeah, that makes sense.
Also,
Okay.
at the time, it was about that's how I remember it. I read it when it first came out, and it was about
Mhm.
outsourcing many of the things which
Mhm.
you can do. But for me, again, it didn't really sit. I just didn't get it.
Okay. Next question is what's one tool that you can't live without as an entrepreneur?
My notebook and my
your
pencil.
your like the
Yeah,
journaling book
or
or
just
okay.
I'm really right here. I have that's my diary and my pencil. It's a calendar. I maybe that's why 4 Hour Work Week didn't work well with me, because that book was about more technology. But I'm still very old school. I like to write everything, and including my agenda, my diary. I like pen and paper, so my notebook.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's fair. Cool. And then maybe the last question is what's one sentence that every entrepreneur needs to hear today?
I would say, keep going. For me, it's not, when we think about business or entrepreneurship, the success often comes when you, I don't want to say least expected, but often what I have seen, this is a long game.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't expect to be, you are going to face a lot of challenges, and I know there is this optimism that you are going to make money very quickly, immediately, and sometimes that could happen, but it usually, behind these successful companies, there is tremendous amount of work, failures, um, that they, often many rejections, but the
Mm-hmm.
difference was that they didn't give up.
They kept going.
Yes, they went to the next
Yeah.
meeting, they took the next call, they reached out to the next person, and
Yeah.
that's what I would like to say: keep going.
Yeah, there's the saying that says the easiest way to fail is to stop trying,
Yes.
you know. And if you just I think about it from like even like in sports, if you're like boxing, the worst adversary is someone who just does not stop because they will just keep going no matter what, and eventually they will win. If you keep going. So yeah, it's a really interesting mentality. And Neri, how do people, yeah, I guess, get a hold of you, get or follow your journey? Is it Twitter, LinkedIn? Like how should people get a hold of
I'm
you?
not on Twitter, but I'm on Instagram. My account is prof.neri, and on LinkedIn I'm Neri Karra Sillaman. And yeah, those two places. This is basically, and I have a website. The easiest one is my name, nerikarasilaman.com or nerispeaks.com. So yeah, reach out, ask me a question. I love talking to people who read the book, and
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll put the links to all of these things in our show notes. So the websites, your Instagram, LinkedIn, even for your book. There might be some people interested in your book to learn more about your story, because we obviously can't get through all the details on our episode today. So yeah, I will thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today and to teach our audience a little bit about the resilience and the entrepreneurial mindset of immigrants and your own story throughout the way. So again, thank you for your time
thank
today.
you, Eric. It was a pleasure.